The only thing that makes me nervous about talking about this movie is that I know I'm gonna have to talk about my musical taste.
Good God, it's a child catcher.
No, Johanna Morrigan is dead. This is the legendary Dolly Wilde.
The music in this film was a big part of the journey because obviously she's a music critic, but also KOKY felt very strongly on a lot of fronts about how the music would play out through the movie, because we have a mixture of live bands, which right from the very beginning, you know, it was really important to her that the bands were playing live on the day when we shot them.
It works on so many different levels, the music. I mean, it sort of starts as if it's the music in her head, really. You have kind of musical theatre as a really big influence on young Johanna. Basically, that's all she's really listened to, that and her dad's jazz. And then she's introduced to a world of kind of grungy bands and sweaty, kind of underground Manic Street Preachers, those kind of bands. And she's introduced to it, and it's sort of like a light bulb goes on in her head.
Music saturates the film. My father was a musician, as he is in the film. I became a music journalist, as happens in the film. If you're poor, culture is pretty much all you have to get you through. I was brought up believing that if I finally got rich and I could buy designer clothes and posh boots and an amazing handbag and get my hair did, that I would finally feel confident enough to walk into a meeting and be the lady boss. And when I did finally have enough money to do those things and I wore those clothes, I didn't feel confident at all. What made me feel confident was putting my headphones on the way to that meeting and listening to the Jesus and Mary chains upside down incredibly loudly. Music gives you power, culture gives you power. If you have amazing songs in your head, no one can touch you.
That was completely my era of music, this film and where it's set in the early 90s. You talk to people who lived through the 60s and the Beatles and things like that, and different waves like Bowie and punk and all that, and I think what eventually became Britpop in the mid-90s was definitely that time when we were younger and had all our aspirations and no kids and not too many cares. So it was a special time for music. I don't think it's happened since, if I'm honest with you.
Music is the rocket fuel that will take you to your destination. If you feel sad or tired or heartbroken, the right song will put you back on your feet, it will put a smile on your face, it will put your chin up, and you will walk out that room a queen.
Music was alive, it was before the X Factor, so it was bands, proper bands who had proper songs.
And so the soundtrack to the film is literally the soundtrack to her growing up, evolving, her journey, her story, as she builds her girl. And we've got some good bangers in there. We've got some anthems, we've got some really, really memorable tracks from the early 90s, but we've also got a song that Guy Garvey wrote for us, Guy Garvey from Elbow. He wrote us a song.
I really love Elbow, and Guy Garvey wrote a song for the film, and we listened to it on repeat in the studio, and I pretty much cried every time.
In the 90s, I remember really it just being about Blur versus Oasis, and some terrible house numbers.
I only listened to like James Taylor and Carole King and Joni Mitchell and show tunes. That is like my iPod.
My favourite bands at the time were all bands that now when I say their names, they sound made up and no one will believe them. They were Jane's Addiction and American Music Club and Mazzy Star and The Sundays. I love the Manic Street Preachers. I love Teenage Fan Club. There was a band called Levitation who I used to write I Love Levitation on every bus stop in Wolverhampton, and I believe some of that graffiti is endured to this day. I would hope it's going to be protected with a Perspex screen in the manner of a Banksy.
There was a few warehouse parties which I wasn't going to because I was only 7.
So, the interview.
Ah, the interview.
My first question is, if you had to murder someone evil, how would you do it?
Oh, that is an amazing question.
What's your worst song?
Oh, I don't know.
Which is the best Beatle?
Well, that's quite
What would you spend £1 on in a sweet shop?
Darling, have you ever done an interview before?
No. I will be honest with you, I've never done anything before. I'm quite new. I went on a plane today for the first time. Do you know how amazing it is?
Tell me.
Today I learned an astounding thing. It's always sunny above the clouds. However awful it is on Earth, if you go high enough, it's always summer. Isn't that amazing?
I grew up watching films about boys, watching TV shows about boys, reading books about boys, listening to the male voice, and I just thought they were universal stories. And so I'm thrilled to find that finally stories about girls and girls' voices are being seen as normal stories too.
So many other female writers coming up now, you know, Hannah Gadsby being one of the greats, the most recent ones, is beginning to really change the culture. So she's culturally of huge significance.
You know, she is a feminist, but she embraces everybody. She's very clear always in saying, you know, being a feminist does not mean you're taking things away from men. You just want to be equal to them. And she loves guys. She loves men. You know, she's very embracing and encompassing.
It's just a lovely story about family and about what goes on in families and what goes on in people in relationships and what happens in a room with just two people in, because you're only two people there. And this movie gives you an insight into that.
You know, it's for anyone that's ever had a dream or ever had a goal and has ever gone out and done that. And I think that very few people start in one place and end up there.
Our film is giving women permission to mess up and to not be great at things, and to be great at things, and to sometimes be great at things, and just permission to be human and succeed and not succeed and all of these things. And I think that is what this film is to me. Like, you mess up some days and you rock some days, and if I could have been given that permission at like 15 years old, or when I'm 85 years old, I want to be reminded of the permission that sometimes you're great and sometimes you feel lost in a version of yourself. And I think that's what this film gives people.